Good evening, and welcome to this service of Wednesday Holden Evening Prayer during Lent. I am Pastor Betsy, and together with my colleagues Peter and Ruth, we are so glad that you have joined us in this virtual environment. Even though we can't be here together in the sanctuary, know that you are part of this worshiping community and that you are important to us. I would like to thank our musicians who will be leading us this evening in Holden Evening Prayer, and Chris Henningson, who is our speaker tonight, sharing a story of holy surprise. I also wanted to let you know that our offering this evening goes to the Roseville Angel Fund. The Angel Fund was created by the faith communities in the city of Roseville, and it's administered through Keystone Community Services. It was created in 2016. And since that time, it has helped 87 families, mostly with rental assistance, but also other economic needs. This fund is so important, especially in this time when people who are just barely making it are hit even harder if they lose their job, if they aren't able to work, and know that what you are doing through these donations is reaching out in love to those in our community. I hope that this service of Holding Evening Prayer will be a blessing to you.
This is a story about my little brother and me. My little brother is not my youngest brother. My youngest brother is 5 years younger than me, but my little brother is only a year younger than me, but he's 5 inches shorter. He had an interesting life. After he graduated from college, he went and got his PhD in agricultural economic history, which is the history of the producers of the food in America and their issues with economics over the years that the United States has been the United States. After he got his PhD, he went to work for Rich Nolan in the 6th District of Minnesota, and he was his agricultural policy advisor. And this was Rick Nolan's first tour of duty in the House of Representatives. And then after Jimmy Carter got elected president, Robert Berglund from the 7th District of Minnesota became the Secretary of Agriculture. And my brother went to work for the Secretary of Agriculture as his policy advisor. My brother's name was Bert Jr., because that was my dad's name also. We called him Randy up until he was about 30 years old, and then he decided that he wanted to be Bert Jr. I still call him Randy, so I'll probably be calling him Randy in this speech here. In 1980, after Ronald Reagan won the presidency, Jimmy Carter's administration was out, and Randy no longer had a job in Washington, D.C., so he and his wife moved back to Minnesota, and they got divorced about as soon as he moved back here. And then my brother met up with a farmer friend of his that lived south of Glenwood, Minnesota, on a small farm, raised hogs. And so he moved in with this farmer friend of his and went to work teaching history at the University of Minnesota Morris. And about 1982, he called me up one day and he said, "I want to talk to you and I need to talk to you alone." My goodness, what's this going to be all about? And so we set a time and a place and we met up, and no bullshit, he just came right out with it. He said, "Chris, I'm gay." That's my reaction. Holy cow, how can that be? My brother homosexual? That was what's going on in my mind. Externally, I said to him, "Well, I guess you're still my brother. I'm not going to disown you. You know, I have issues," and I told him but we'll get through it. And so life went on. And we eventually, Randy and his partner Dick would come down to the cities periodically for a weekend. And once in a while, we'd have them over for dinner, and we got to meet Dick. Then in 1986, Dick was diagnosed with AIDS. And so now I had my second surprise. First surprise, of course, was my brother's announcement. Second surprise, Dick now has AIDS. AIDS in 1986 was a death penalty. And we watched Dick slowly progress towards his death. And the spring of the next year, he was in the hospital at HCMC downtown here. He had been in the hospital for a couple days. I went down to the hospital to visit with my brother primarily. I didn't know Dick that well. And walked into the waiting room, and here's this room full of gay men from the Minnesota AIDS Project. I'd never been in a room so full of gay people in my life, and probably never will again. They had all kinds of friends, and Randy invites me to go into the room where Dick is in bed. He's awake, but he's got tubes sticking in him. They're dripping all these experimental AIDS drugs in him. They didn't really have the concoction then that they have today. And shook Dick's hand, kind of wasn't real easy to do, but, you know, even though I knew that AIDS was only distributed or passed contagious by exchanging bodily fluids, yet shaking his hand, I had a kind of tremor inside me to do that. And about that time, the nurse tells my brother that he's got a phone call at the desk. This was before cell phones, of course. He went to the desk, and I was alone with Dick for a few minutes. Very awkward, not knowing him that well, him having AIDS, him being the partner of my brother. I was just very uneasy about the whole situation. And then my brother came back. The phone call was from her mother, wanting to know how Dick was doing. And in his arms, he had a bouquet of flowers that had been delivered to the desk that had not yet been delivered to Dick's room. So he brings these flowers into the room, sets them on a table in the room. He says, "Dick, you got some flowers." Dick said, "Well, who sent them?" So Randy pulls the card out of the flowers, opens it up, and it was the ladies' circle from the little country Lutheran church south of Glenwood where he grew up. Dick's comment was, "My church still loves me." Holy surprise. He had almost given up on his church. The church in those days, lots of churches still today, have a lot of discrimination against homosexuals. He was so overwhelmed by this little bouquet of flowers that it made me kind of shake when I heard him say that. So life went on. A little bit later that summer, the St. Paul newspapers decided to run an article about the AIDS epidemic in America. That epidemic was different than the one today because it wasn't one that affected everybody. But it was an epidemic, certainly within the gay community. So the paper wrote this series of articles, ran it on the Sunday paper about every other Sunday. They ran 3 articles, and it was about Dick and my brother Randy. AIDS in the heartland. How do you get AIDS clear out in Glenwood, Minnesota? And people always thought it was congregations of people in the cities, but no, here's 2 rural guys. One of them has AIDS. He eventually died in June of that year. We were at the funeral, my whole family, mother, father, my brother, sister, and myself, supporting my brother. And after the service was over, we were standing in the narthex, and my younger brother and myself were going to give Randy a hug. And I was positioned so that I could see the cameraman lady from the St. Paul paper. The writer and the photographer were both there covering the funeral for their next article. And as I was going to give Randy a hug, up comes her camera. And I said, give me some privacy. And so she puts her camera down. The last thing I wanted was for the Sunday St. Paul paper to have a picture of me hugging my homosexual brother on the front page of the St. Paul paper. But when this article came out, it had issued the names of both of our families. And our family is me and my brother, my mother, my sister, listed us all by name and where we lived, and Dick's family. Dick's family, all his brothers ostracized him. They have nothing to do with him after he came out as homosexual. Our mother was so glad that our family didn't split up like that. So that's something we can certainly be thankful for. One of the issues was, now that this article was out there with my name in the article, all my friends that read the St. Paul paper now knew that I had a homosexual brother. All my wife's friends knew that she had a homosexual brother-in-law. Both of my kids, their friends that read the St. Paul paper now knew that they had a homosexual uncle. Now, Audrey and I didn't get a whole lot of blowback from our friends. In fact, we got a lot of support here at Prince of Peace. Friends around the community, Audrey's teaching friends, my work friends. It was a little bit tougher for the kids. Troy was a junior high school at the time, and you know what that age is, that kids like to pick on each other and play king of the mountain. And so Troy came home one day and told Audrey that he wished we had a different last name. And so I think it affected him more than the rest of us in the family. Then, not too long after the funeral, word came from Randy that he had been diagnosed with AIDS. Surprise? Probably not. Probably a foregone conclusion after living with another person with AIDS, being the primary caregiver, giving the sponge baths, feeding him, etc., etc. Probably getting saliva or maybe even sexual dissemination of bodily fluids. He was diagnosed with AIDS. I wouldn't call it a real surprise. I kind of expected that would be an eventuality. And then, as life went on, we had church here at Prince of Peace. We were sitting in the pew where we always sat, right over there. And the scripture reading that Sunday was from 1 John, where it said, if you can't love your brother, how can you love God? If you can't fully love your brother, how can you fully love God? That walloped me right upside the head. Holy surprise. Right out of the scripture, condemning me for not being able to fully love my brother. So what did I do? I went into the Bible, and I read the four Gospels. And I found not a word in any of those Gospels about homosexuality. And then I thought about, in fact, just about 4 weeks ago or so, from the pulpit here, I read about the Transfiguration, where God says, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. I had read that and listened to him. What does Jesus say that we should listen to? Well, he talks about, if you do this to the least of these, you do it unto me. If you don't do it to the least of these, you don't do it to me. And if I don't fully love my brother, I don't fully love Jesus, was my conclusion. I had to start reorienting my thought processes. And then I came to the section of the Bible, I found it in Matthew, Betsy preached about it Sunday out of Mark. Love God, love your neighbor. Love your God, love neighbor. And the very next verse in Matthew, verse 40, says, and on these two commandments hang all of the laws. On these two commandments hang all the laws. So then I got to looking at that Leviticus law in chapter 20 of Leviticus that says homosexuality is an abomination and homosexuals should be killed. Kill homosexuals, love your neighbor. Kill homosexuals, love your neighbor. Kill your neighbor, love your neighbor. It didn't jive. There's something wrong in the Bible here. It's conflicting. And I had a hard time wrestling with it. How can it be that there's two verses in the Bible that are 100% opposed to each other? And I finally concluded that the Bible is not inerrant. Holy surprise. To me, the Bible is not inerrant. There are errors that have got introduced in the Bible in the process of it orally being transmitted for decades and centuries, being or physically written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. We don't have the first copy of Leviticus that was ever written, so I have no way of knowing whether that verse was in the first version that Moses supposedly wrote, or whether it wasn't. I'm concluding that that's not a godly law. And me concluding that allowed me to begin to more fully love my brother. As life went on that summer, after he was diagnosed with AIDS, our daughter Terry said, Randy took care of Dick for the whole time he was sick. Who's going to take care of him? And we said, well, he's going to move back home with Grandma and Grandpa. He moved in with our folks, and he spent the last month of his life living with them. So that summer, we went through Labor Day, celebrated his birthday, which was 2 days after mine, celebrated or had Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. By Christmas time, you could tell that he was deteriorating. He had gotten thinner, his cheeks were a little hollower, and he was starting to show the effects of AIDS working on his body. After Christmas that year, he started to going down real fast. And by the end of February that year, he was hospitalized. And a couple days after being hospitalized, I got a telephone call at work from my mother. She never called me at work before, but she did have my phone number because I had given her one of my business cards over the years. And she told me that I better come home today if I wanted to see him alive anymore. And I had a big meeting tomorrow at work, or the next day at work. And I had to be at that meeting, or at least I thought I had to be at that meeting. And so I left work early that afternoon and went home. Changed my clothes. Our kids were home from school by then. And Troy didn't want to go, but Terry did want to go. So Terry and I left about 4:30. It's about a 3.5-hour drive from here to Ortonville, where my folks live. And I got there about 8 o'clock in the evening. And of course, there's a waiting room full of relatives. Mom and Dad, 2 sets of uncles, a couple of cousins, nursing staff that knew the family, etc. Big room of people, so it was hugs all around. And after all the chit-chat was done, Terry and I went into Randy's room to see him, just the two of us. And here he is, he's got the same situation that I saw with Dick. Got the tube in his arm, running the antibiotics and whatever else the medications were. Got the oxygen on his nose, and monitors were beeping in the background because they've got him EKG'd up with the tabs. And he was in a coma. He just laid there. And so we just stood there for a little while, and then we left and went back to the waiting room to meet with the rest of the family. And about 11 o'clock that evening, my mother wanted a family caucus with just the three of us kids and Mom and Dad. What should we do with Randy? Should we intubate him? Should we feed him intravenously? Or should we just let him die? Because the doctor had said, and the doctor was gone by the time we got there, but it told my folks that he wasn't going to live through the night. And so we decided that he wouldn't want to be, have artificial life. If he was going to die, he would want to die semi-naturally. So we all voted not to plug in all this other heroic stuff. And, okay, so Mom would inform the doctor not to do any of these heroic things in the middle of the night. And it got to be about midnight, and it was time for me to think about heading back home because I had a 3.5-hour drive back. And so I went into his room by myself, and I held his hand. I told him I was sorry, that I hadn't fully loved him. I thanked him for the way he helped Dick, and said the Lord's Prayer, "Thy will be done," said goodbye, and left. Terry and I drove back home. I went to my meeting the next morning after having a couple hours of sleep. I don't remember what the meeting was about. No idea anymore. That was 40-some years ago. And after I got back from that meeting, it was a 2-3 hour meeting, one of those head knocker type things that you sometimes have with the vice president. I remember it was with the vice president who had come into town to spread his wings. And there was a note on my desk from the secretary saying, "Call your mother." So I knew this is the news, the official news. So I called her. She had given me the hospital number because that's where she was. And so, of course, you get to the hospital, they forward you to the nurse's station. The nurse's station has to go find my mom. Mom gets on the phone. As soon as she knows it's me, before I even say hello, she said, "He woke up!" Holy surprise. The doctor came in his office in the morning, according to Mom. Randy was sitting up in bed, eyes wide open, and talking. So he was still in the hospital for 2-3 more days, and they sent him home. And we had Easter. We had Palm Sunday. We went out there for Palm Sunday. I remember being there. He was skin and bones by then. Hard for him to walk without help. No appetite, ate very little. And went through Easter. So it was about this time of the year that this went on. And in the middle of May, he passed away. And I guess from that experience of sticking my nose in the Bible and finding out that there's maybe things in the Bible that shouldn't be there was kind of earth-shattering to me. And I guess my advice to people is don't cherry pick verses out of the Bible without understanding the full message of the Bible, the full message of the gospel. Love God, love your neighbor. Amen.